find. Oh, there it is. Thanks, Dan. So yeah, this is the Arborist call for the 18th of April. This is the second Arborist call today. This is in the regular time slot. We did have one earlier to discuss network upgrades and similar issues. We're going to continue that discussion after the regular updates today. So we'll start off with the core team updates, and we'll then go into research and implementation updates. We've already heard a lot about ZSAs today, and that team don't generally join this call anyway, so we'll skip them. And we'll go on to open announcements, and then we'll return to the discussion that we were engaged in earlier today. What are Arborist calls? They are bi-weekly calls that are attended by most of the people who are involved in the Zcash protocol. The idea is that we, through these calls, make the process, the sausage making of Zcash protocol development more accessible and more visible to the Zcash community. Anybody can join and participate in these calls. And if you want to suggest a topic for discussion, just drop us an email at arboristcall@zfnd.org. There are other ways to get involved with Zcash. You can apply for a Zcash community grant. You can join the Zcash R&D Discord, where most of the engineers who are engaged in development relating to the protocol hang out and coordinate. Or you can join the Zcash community forum, where there's a lot of discussion going on, including at the moment about the potential for a new dev fund. And you can find all these links by pointing your browser at zcasharborist.org. So let's start off with core team updates, and who is in?
I can do that.
I was just about to say that you've got a different name today there.
Oh dear. I haven't actually changed my name again to Jack Grigg, so I will just fix that. Okay. Yes, so we have tagged Zcash 590 RC1. The last sort of full release of Zcash that is sort of still working is EOS halting soon, so that's an urgent priority for this week. And I would expect the final 590 to be tagged tomorrow. Does that sound right, Chris and Strad?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, cool. And yes, we have been sort of there's been a lot of development on the Zcash. Chris or Strad, can you sort of elaborate on that?
Yep. So the main, I think the main things from the last couple of weeks have been essentially work that has fixed up some bugs and corner cases that were discovered in the process of the Zashi rollout. So some database migration that was required to ensure that existing wallets have an Orchard receiver in their unified address, and then a couple of other just relatively minor cleanup things. Strad, is there anything I'm forgetting? And then last week we spent a bunch of time on roadmap planning, which Josh posted to the forum yesterday, I believe.
Yeah, that sounds about right to me.
Speaking of which, I've just sort of added the some sort of target tickets for deploying NU6 and NU7, and sort of a very rough outline of the dependency graph. And you can see that on the core DAG. It may not have rendered yet, but it's there. The core DAG, by the way, is on developer Zcash. Hang on, let me just find it. Zcash.github.io/developers.
Yep.
Cool. Any questions relating to ECC's work?
Oh, one thing that I want to mention here, we've had an issue, or we and many others in the ecosystem of in the iOS ecosystem have had a problem for a few months with regard to Xcode, specifically Xcode 15.3 has some sort of bug in its build system that broke a bunch of projects that had binary static files inside them. We were affected by this. The latest version of the iOS SDK has that fixed. So if you're running into that problem, upgrade to the latest version of the iOS, the Swift SDK to get that resolved.
Cool, thank you. Andrew.
With Zashi 1.0 out, I'm wondering if we can get any, what's the expectation for prioritization for bugs that prevent other wallets from interpreting transactions in an account recovery correctly? I filed 2 or 3, which I think the folks here, like Chris, are aware of, but they've just been deprioritized so far, and I'm wondering if that's if I could. How are we prioritizing other wallets that use the Libras Zcash code base that have issues?
We are prioritizing them highly, yes. So
awesome.
Now that we're beyond the crunch and planning week, those things are top of the list.
Great, thank you.
Yes.
The next part of this is sort of in the general trend towards being able to also in the trend of being able to get rid of deprecate Zcashd is to make certainly the Rust parts of the wallets, not necessarily the Kotlin and Swift pieces, because those are very mobile SDK specific. So we're still not currently looking at turning those into making those usable for desktop, even though in theory you could use the Swift one is relatively minimally coupled to Apple, other than it's entirely coupled to Apple because Swift. But but from the Rust side perspective, the intention is for the use cases of that to strengthen over time, to enable us to do things like support the more varied sets of transactions that are needed for the equivalent of Zcash wallet. So bugs of those sort are good to report. Please continue reporting them as you find them.
Great, thank you.
Cool. Let's move on now to the Zcash Foundation. I think Alfredo has got the job today.
Yes, thank you, Dr. So in the last 2 weeks or so, the Zebra team has worked in some improvements to the getBlock RPC method. Before, the getBlock RPC method in Zebra just had the fields for wallet D functionality. We now improve it and prepare to add more fields to make it more compatible to what Zcash does. But by the request of a community member, we added the block time field, and we are planning how to add the rest of the field in the verbosity level Zcash has. Another thing we're working on is that, I'm not sure if this was mentioned in the last call, but we added disk size with Zebra Star, so we can know how big is the blockchain when Zebra shutdowns. This was the work of an external contributor, which the GitHub handle of this contributor is Elijah Hampton. So thank you for that. And in the last few days, we make a small adjustment to the PR, so the display of the size are in a more human readable form. So instead of just putting the bytes there, which are a long string of numbers, it now say that in gigs or in megs or whatever. We target the 1.6.1 release, which includes the first version of the OpenAPI spec, which is documentation for our RPC methods in the Swagger style. We are continuing making progress in regards to the Rex test support in Zebra. This will allow to spawn private networks and help other teams and ourselves to build network upgrade features more easily. This is part of the Zcash deprecation process. We fixed a lot of Rust beta warning and pumped a lot of dependencies that we spent some time in there. It was a bit harder than we was expecting. And we are continuing planning and prototyping the external client functionality to Zebra, which one of our plans that maybe if we have time later today to discuss it for the integration between Zebra and Zcash client backend by using the Zebra scan project we did with Zebra before. That's one of the ideas we have for deprecated Zcash in that part in regards to wallet functionality. And yeah, I think that's it.
Any comments or questions on Zebra? Actually, the mention of that last bit just reminds me of something that I've been wondering. Should we add a specific slot during these calls to discuss the Zcash deprecation work? And I'll let Jack and Tara speak.
Yeah, happy to do that.
Yeah, give in the same way that we generally end up with like a talking point about network upgrades. I think that would be a useful one to have for the certainly for the remainder of this year. The question I had was: has there been any further progress related to the integration testing ability of Zcash of ZBD, or is that still is that blocked on anything other than the Equihash solver piece that I've been working on?
We're kind of working on that. Arya is basically working on that. I'm not sure if he's here.
Sorry.
Yeah, you want to talk about that, Arya?
Yep, we're making good progress. Right now, I think the next step is going to be to create the Genesis blocks in ZBRD for reg test. And then there are a few more fields that we need to add in order to have a very minimal, still incompatible with Zcash version of reg test. And from there, we can continue on to make it fully compatible. For now, we're thinking that we're going to just disable proof of work altogether until we can restore the internal miner so that it works, even though it doesn't provide the full coverage.
Yep.
Is there any reason, by the way, not to just use the reg test Genesis blocks from Zcash?
No, I don't believe there is, so we could do that too.
That part also is that's not going to work if the reg test is incompatible, or it depends exactly on how the compatibility is with Zcash.
Oh yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah. In any case, on the generation side, just to that point, I've finished reintegrating and squashing and cleaning up the changes that Tail made on top of the initial Equihash PR that I did. So collectively, the two get it working. So I've just finished putting those pulling those pieces in together, and I'm currently now doing some other refactoring to for better testability of some of the pieces that Taylor introduced. So I'm hoping in the next week or so we'll have that piece into the Equihash crate. What it won't have is the ability to run with multiple parameter sets on the solver side. That's going to need someone to do additional adjustments to the C code. So instead of, because the C code currently hard codes via C ifdefs, C defines the parameters it works for. It works for a bunch of different parameters, but you have to pick it at compile time. So that's not that will require a little bit of work from someone to make it compatible with multiple parameter sets, specifically the two we care about, the main testnet version and the reg test version. But the core of it will be working with mainnet version of mainnet and testnet versions of the parameters will be working in soon.
Yes, I have my hand up because so when I generate the DAGs for I've got a little script that does it for Core Wallet, TFL, Halo 2, and ZF. And for a while now, the ZF one has been failing with a code 500 internal server error. So it might be worth us just trying to fix that so that we can integrate the Zebra DAG and the ECC DAGs and see what the dependencies between them are, especially for the deprecation process.
Conrado, were you looking at this recently, or am I imagining something?
Yeah, it's been a while. We don't use the DAG as much as the CC does, so it's. I think it broke at some point, and I intended to look at it, but I never managed to do that. But yeah, I can take a look to see what's going on.
Okay, thanks.
Just a question. I think if I remember correctly, the DAG script uses both ZenHub and GitHub.
That's right, yes.
But I can't seem to. I think we kind of stopped using ZenHub. So maybe that's the reason.
Yeah,
I mean,
we have also stopped using ZenHub other than as a data store for the DAG.
Right.
And as a way of easily updating it in the UI, because we just use the ZenHub plugin for GitHub to gain access to that data. If anyone with DevSecOps chops wants to collaborate on replacing that part, I would be very, very, very happy.
Same.
But I think there isn't a way in GitHub to.
Nope.
I mean,
dependencies, right?
Nope. There is nothing native.
What I would propose is just reading the description of the ticket and recognizing things like blocks or blocked by.
Yeah.
Right, but that's only a very small part of that. That helps with the data storage part. That does not at all help with the UX of manipulating it. Because you end up in a situation where you have to be like parsing both ends and parsing the being resilient against third parties making changes, and it becomes a very tricky process there.
I mean, I have some ideas on how to do it, but we don't need to get into that.
Yeah. Anyway.
Any other questions relating to Zebra? Okay, let's move on to Frost, and I expect we're back with Conrado.
Yeah. So we basically wrapping up phase 2 of adding online communication to the demo, to the Frost demo. So that's just a single PR that needs to be reviewed, but it's working. So with that ready, we have like our demo. We don't need to copy paste things anymore. Our demo works over the internet using a server for help handling communication between participants and coordinator. And we are planning the next steps after that. There are a lot of stuff that needs to be done for this to turn into. Our intention is for this to turn into like a solution that can be used by wallets to deploy Frost. And some of these things are like user registration, some user registration mechanisms in the server. We need encryption, authentication for the communication between participants and stuff like that. So yeah, we're basically planning the next steps. And I think that's mostly it. Yeah.
I think it's probably fair to say that a lot of the work in the next step is not necessarily as crypto heavy. So if people are interested in getting involved in supporting this work or contributing to it, do reach out and let us know.
Yep.
Any questions for Conrado? If not, let's move on to trailing finality.
No updates. Well, I guess apart from the roadmap that we published. No updates on the documentation or simulator.
Onto the Sustainability Fund, and Jason, McGee, and Tomek were on the call earlier. They had to drop off, but Jason left a note which I'm going to read out now. So this is Jason McGee's voice. Hi all, Tomek and I need to drop for other commitments, but where we stand with the Zcash Sustainability Fund is we're about 70% complete with the Zebra integration and still have work to do for Zcash D. Tomek feels comfortable we can be done in time for a release with NU6. What we were hoping to get out of this call is, one, what's the precise timeline of when we need to be done to be considered for inclusion in NU6? And two, I think one thing that remains unclear is what are the expectations in terms of governance, specifically gauging community sentiment regarding the Zcash Sustainability Fund and support for its implementation. So that's the update there. I think we're going to talk more about network upgrades later on, but I think there's a clear ask there of what does it mean to be done and considered for inclusion. So almost like having a checklist there. Anybody want to make any comments on that?
With my zip editor hat on, one of the things that came out of some of the more recent reviews of those particular zips is that at least at a specification level, it feels like there is still some things that aren't clearly specified in the zips. So the fact that there is implementation going on is good to know, because that will then be something where one of the things that will be required prior to inclusion in a network upgrade is to make sure that the zip specifications are clear and unambiguous, and the fact that it sounds like they are doing both integration work into Zcash and Zebra means that there will be 3 different spots to be looking at to make sure that they are consistent. My initial concern from the reviews we've done previously was that it just the single implementation as in the specs was insufficiently specified to be implementable. So I'm very glad that they are implementing it because they know what they mean by the specs. So the main next step I see there is to ensure that the specs and the implementations are exactly consistent and clear in terms of what is actually being implemented across the 3 of them. And in addition, being clear in the implementations, which parts of the implementation correspond to which spec, because there is still the question of from a complexity point of view in the network upgrade, what makes sense to include in it when. But the main thing is just making sure that the specifications are clear.
I also want to say that there was some sentiment in the last zip editor meeting. Remember, I'm no longer a zip editor, so Strad can correct me on this, that the current drafts were kind of lacking in clear motivation, clear economic motivation, and needed to contain more detail on what the expected economic effects are, whether the amounts of money involved, so what effect they will have on funding, what effect they'll have on, say, sell pressure for miners, things like that.
Okay. Are the zips relating to this specific enough at this point that there's clarity around exactly what is being proposed? Because remember, there seemed to be some seem to recall there was some uncertainty around percentages. I don't know,
So-
has that been settled?
So, to my mind, there are several parameters that the current drafts do make a proposal, but the question is, does the community agree with those parameters? So one of them is the proportion of transaction fees that go to the sustainability fund, and the other is the exact parameters of the issuance smoothing. So, for example, how does the issuance curve compare to the step function that we currently have? Where does it intersect that step function?
Okay.
Yeah,
That's obviously going to be key for assessing community sentiment, is having
absolutely, and the economics.
Strata, I spoke over you.
Yeah, so I'm just trying to find where the PRs themselves ended up. Yeah, this one here.
Yeah, I think they're still in the PR. They haven't merged.
Yeah, they're still in this PR. Yeah. That's only one of them. Where's the other ones gone?
I've got a list somewhere. Bear with me.
There they are. I found them.
Okay. Yeah, if you look on the TFL and NU6 timeline estimate document, I think they're there. Yeah, there are 5 PRs. So yeah, on zips, 703, 706, 718, 745, and 748. I'll just paste that into the chat. Well, I will if my browser behaves.
And if these are to go into NU6, obviously the changes will need to be accepted into Zebra and Zcash D. And I also feel that an audit is going to be required. And I guess the scope of audit or audits needs to be agreed upon.
That's correct. We need to do that so very soon. That's my responsibility as part of my job as engineering manager to organize audits. And of course, so if ZF, do you want to do a separate audit of the Zebra code? Because there will be a specification. Sorry, there will be an audit that handles the specification and the implementation in Zcash D. Should ZF and ECC share the cost of that, and then it can cover Zebra as well, or does ZF want to organize a separate audit?
Well, we need to have a chat about cost because we're in constrained financial situations.
Understood.
And we can't just take on the cost of everything basically. So
I mean, I would think that any audits would cover all of the NU6 features rather than sort of being split out by feature.
In any case, the other aspect there is, as you know, is like audit scoping and things. Part of the thing with scoping here is that for this one in particular, because of the way in which these changes are split up, both from the perspective of what the community wants to have included, but also from the perspective of where the complexity lies. There is, if we feel that the scope for NU6 is too great with, when we get to the point of deciding what goes into it, there is the ability to look at, for example, including the definition of the ZSF, which is the changes to the transaction format and the changes to how the full nodes account for those, without including the change to the to smooth the issuance curve, which would be like, you can't do the latter without the former, but the latter is also like a fair bit of extra complexity on the, like, it adds to the complexity budget basically.
Yeah, the dependencies are to add that field with CSF deposit, which is dependent on defining the V6 transaction format, and then the issuance smoothing is dependent on defining CSF deposit, and the percentage of fees to the sustainability fund is also dependent on that. So it's like a triangle.
Yeah, and then at the same time, any changes regarding, if the community coalesces around a dev fund option, that will also interact with the existence or not of the issuance smoothing, because anything around how any dev fund option, all of those come out, are how the block subsidy is divided between security and development, but the issuance smoothing changes how the block subsidy equations work. So there will be more issuance at some times and less issuance at others for a smoother output, as the ZIP claims. But from a calculating what's going on perspective, that's a thing to take into account, both in terms of whether the ZSF is, whether the issuance smoothing is present versus absent at the time a dev fund proposal lands, if it does. And then similarly, if a dev fund proposal lands without the issuance smoothing, then the effect of issuance smoothing on that, in addition to mining, is something that needs to be taken into account, which also adds complexity.
It's also worth pointing out that there was some opposition on the forum to a curve that ever went above the current step function. I'm not taking a position on that, but there was some opposition.
And I think there's at least one definite proposal, G guys, where there may be a significant interaction between the two.
Yes.
Interaction is probably the right word, not conflict, but yeah, they could impact one another.
Yeah, and this is the kind of thing that this is where the ordering somewhat matters, because an issuance smoothing ZIP, in the absence of a change to how funding streams work, has one kind of analysis, and that ZIP existing afterwards has a different kind of analysis, and the analysis of the interaction has to happen somewhere. We can't merge. We can't include both things without an analysis of the interaction between them. But so someone has to do that work.
Okay.
So that again argues for audits covering all of the NU6 features rather than individual ones.
Any other comments or questions on that topic? Okay, let's move on to open announcements. If you have any news or an announcement you'd like to share, please raise your hand. I'll give people a few seconds to just check chat. That's just links to the zips.
Josh, do you want to do a plug for ZBoot? Sorry, it's what's it called now? Zec
Summit, yeah.
Zec Summit.
Yeah, hold on, let me turn my video on. Am I here? Okay.
We can see.
Yeah, so if you weren't aware, like, we did a thing before in January that we called ZBoot, and that was kind of coming back together in terms of ECC planning. And one of the things that we wanted to do that we're committed to as part of planning in our roadmap at ECC is to engage the community and to involve the community in it as much as possible. We didn't want to do it remotely, and so it was an in-person event. And we came together. We had ECC had some sessions on a Monday, and then we invited the community in on Tuesday and Wednesday, and then ECC wrapped up its time together on Thursday. And so we, with this quarterly planning cycle that we're now on, what we decided is to do the ZBoot thing quarterly. So it was really well received. I think the people that were there, both from the ECC team as well as the community, were really energized, and we got a lot of great kind of collaborative work done on those days. So the next one is in July. Since we're not going to reboot every 6 months, it's now the ZEC Summit. So Z/ECC, this kind of aggregation of the Zcash community and ECC on ECC's planning. We got a limited number of seats. We don't accept everybody. We can't accept everybody, but if you're a developer working in the Zcash ecosystem, and I use the developer word broadly, but if you're working in the Zcash ecosystem and as an active participant and would like to participate, there's a post on the forum. I'd have to go. I'll get the link in a second and post it in the chat, and you can register. And we'll do it again in July in San Diego. So we hope some of you will be able to make it.
Cool. Let's now move on. Return to the discussion that we were having earlier about network upgrade planning. And so hopefully everybody's had a little bit of time to relax and cool down. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to stop sharing this PDF and just return to the previous window that I was using. So we spent a lot of time discussing ZSAs. We've just spent some time discussing the Sustainability Fund, and I wonder if there's anything else to discuss on that topic.
I mean, I think it's difficult because the people from Shielded Labs are not here.
Yeah.
I
Fortunately,
mean,
the next Arborist call will be in the earlier slot.
Yep.
And Tomek should be able to make it then. So
yeah, and I also, while I was looking at the PRs earlier, it looks like sometime in the last week they responded to the feedback that the zip editors gave 2 months ago, a month or two ago, and so there's going to be some additional things that I presume will come up at the next zip editors meeting, which is next. When is it? I'll have to go look at it, but whenever the next zip editors meeting is, we will look at that again. But yeah, so sort of where from a Sustainability Fund part, yeah, getting an update from them on the status of an implementation and how how that reflects on what's currently in the zips, and additionally how modularizable it currently is in terms of if we need to only include one or other of the zips, as we were just saying before, depending on complexity and audit budget and whatnot. Yeah, getting feedback from them on that will be useful as input.
I think the other thing that they were asking for is, what the requirements are. And I've literally just gone and dug out the checklist that we put together relating to NU5. Which might provide us with a kind of a starting point. A lot of this stuff won't be applicable. So, for example, peer review. I don't think we need a peer review of the Sustainability Fund.
Yeah,
but...
so both of the upgrades that this is comparing, NU5 and Sapling, are major circuit upgrades. So this would be comparable, say, to the upgrade in which we do ZSAs, but it's not quite the same as other upgrades.
Yeah.
But I think these items are probably relevant to spec audit, code implementations, implementation. Oh, what did I mean by implementation and test audits? I'm not sure what that means.
Well, auditing the implementation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then testing. And
yeah, the thing that we haven't had in previous network upgrades that I want to strongly encourage, and Kedit has already sort of started along these lines on their own in terms of enabling this, is like getting to the point of an implementation where people can be actively testing it before things are finalized with it. In the recent ECC roadmap, this is mentioned as like transient test nets. But I would be very for things that are having a wider impact on the consensus rules. So like explicit fee field, like that's relatively minor, but a change to issuance is not so much. And getting to the point where people can like download the latest version of what the implementation is, run it, connect to the to a globally running testnet of anyone who happens to be participating in it, check things out, run things, and then that just is expected to roll on like a weekly or fortnightly basis. Would make coordinating on and testing these things far early on, and finding things early, it would make that far easier. We've sort of referred to things in the past of things like, test in a box and other things we've tried to do to make testing easier. And I actually want it to happen this time.
Yeah,
I'm just gonna
as I just pointed out on the chat, the roadmap that ECC posted has transient testnets sort of penciled in for June for NU6.
Yeah, and those currently are sort of indicated as like transient testnets for like the early stage of what might be collected into that upgrade. But I would love to be seeing things earlier than that for the specific ideas.
Yes.
We should always be testing.
Aria.
We are also making progress towards configurable testnets in Zebra as part of the reg test work.
Yeah, like the thing that would be neat here, I think, from an enabling it perspective, is if there was something in probably the thing I'm thinking about here is really just like a GitHub action that runs like weekly and just shuts down what on whatever branches we configure it for. So if we have like a feature branch for ZSAs, a feature branch for ZSF, and so on, that then the people primarily helping to get that in are doing integration testing and things there, and then weekly or bi-weekly the action just runs and tears down what's ever there, builds a new thing, sets it up, and we go from there. I don't know how much effort that will be to set up, but that feels like if we can get that running, then we can have a bunch of people can then just build their feature branches and just immediately hook into that process.
Yeah, I don't know whether this is too ambitious, but it would be nice to have a testnet with both Zcash and Zebra on it. But we shouldn't block on that if it's not feasible in the time.
I'm pretty sure that we've had Zebra
I mean,
on.
the main, sorry, not main, but the public testnet obviously has had Zcash and Zebra running on it at various times for NU5, for example.
Yeah, but these transient test nets, for the reason of we want them to be iterative and quick, we also don't want to be like paying a bunch of cost to run like real world mining on them. So the approach that Aria was mentioning before of like not even having proof of work at all on them makes total sense for this kind of environment, because we don't need to be testing the interaction with real proof of work here in most cases. Some test nets we would need that, like a proof of stake testing test net kind of needs to also have the proof of work bit. But for most of these things, what we're really interested in is the consensus feature. We don't need any of that. So it's really, I would think of this more as a global 2-week-long version of like the Zcash Ridge test integration testing, rather than the duration of a single CI run.
Yeah, it may be worth, because we obviously have a CI that, does a fair amount of what's just been described, to run through a whole bunch of tests. So it may be worth, when the time is right, when we're ready to start talking about doing this, to look at how that's set up, and Gustavo would be the man to talk us through that. Although obviously all the ZF engineers are somewhat familiar with it, but I think that's for a later date.
Yeah.
By the way, the things that you've got here are already on the core DAG.
Yep.
Possibly with the exception of testing, but I can easily add that. So yeah, and the core DAG is going to be the sort of point of truth for what the dependencies are in tasks for NU6 and NU7.
At least from our perspective, other people can maintain their own to-do lists if they wish. We like DAGs. We should also just, for completeness on this, we should put like spec written at the top, just for if we're going to try and make a general list here.
Specs or zip?
Zips.
Both.
Yeah.
Actually, both.
Yeah.
Zips and
that bit is context dependent, but yeah.
And accepted do we need the zip editors to sign off and say that this zip is suitable?
Strad, explain the zip process here.
So the general zip process here is anyone can draft a zip. Zips live in the draft state, and what we're trying to move towards is, rather than having long-running PRs in the Zips repo, moving towards getting an initial draft in, get that to the point where it's like we're at least comfortable that this is something that wouldn't be against like the ethos of Zcash, and like is something that there's enough interest in the ecosystem to pursue, and then get that merged in, and then it lives as a draft, continually being improved until it gets to the right point. The right point here is when it goes to, I think the status is proposed.
Yes.
I wanted to check. Yeah, the status of proposed, which is the transition from this was a draft and it's possibly incomplete to this has had sufficient eyes on it. It has achieved essentially rough consensus in terms of design. Actually, no, it's somewhat beyond that at that point. When it transitions to proposed, the zip editors are satisfied that. Like there may be tiny changes and things that happen in the process of like getting implementations in, but the zip is in a state where like what will get deployed is basically that, as opposed to, so there's no major outstanding issues. And from the perspective of a consensus related zip, that's the point at which it needs to have essentially been spec audited. I don't think we can really transition for most specifically consensus zips. We can't transition to proposed or at least we can't transit. What's the status after proposed? I'm just going to go look up.
Active. So active in this case. So implemented would
implemented
mean
is the status I'm thinking of. Yeah. Because if we look at those particular steps in there, down to the status down here.
Yeah. And implemented it's a status that applies to either Zcash or Zebra or both.
Right, but implemented is where we have a working reference, but it's before it has been activated in a consensus upgrade. So proposed is the point where the community is like, yep, we're on board with this. This is the thing. It's going to go into some upgrade. It hasn't necessarily been scheduled for an upgrade. So I guess that's the core distinction there. Proposed does not mean this is going into NU6 or NU7 or whatever, but proposed does mean this is actually going to make us network as it is. So
so the point at which it's definitely, I mean, subject to security bugs and emergency changes. The point at which it's going into an upgrade is when you have a deployment zip that specifies everything going into that upgrade. So there's one for every previous upgrade.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I note actually zip0 does say that a deployment section must be present for the zip to change status to propose. So that technically is stronger than what I just said, which that implies that you can't transition to proposed until it has been scheduled for a network upgrade. I personally don't think it needs to be quite that strict, but we should have at the point it goes to proposed, we need to know how it is going to be deployed, even if we don't know precisely what upgrade it's going to go deployed in.
Yeah.
Would it be useful to come up with a flowchart similar to this?
We have had several such flowcharts in the past, and how well they have, how well the network upgrade pipeline, if that's a term people remember, has helped people is debatable. But yeah,
I think the problem with the previous network upgrade pipelines is that the timelines. So mainly the timelines for planned upgrades were not realistic, and so they would tend to slip.
Yeah. But yeah, a general workflow, because like the zip0 at the moment is just it is a very big wall of text. And GitHub now does actually support rendering to like mermaid diagrams and things. So actually having a flowchart that corresponds to what we currently have written in there would be quite beneficial, I think, for other people to.
I think not just having it written, but not just what's in zip0, but also things like the implementation audits, the explicit things that we
and
plan
I think
to require, and we don't have to make it generic.
I agree that stuff should exist, Dodger, in that diagram, and my point is that that's kind of what zip0 is meant to be codifying from the perspective of how we get specifications to be part of the network.
No, there was actually there's a placeholder for a zip1, which was going to say basically precisely what Dodger said, but we never got around to writing it. And that would have been sort of what is the process for a network upgrade.
Oh, so there is. I hadn't seen that then. Then yeah, we should just put that diagram there instead then.
Some other things that pop into my head. Obviously, we've talked about potential interactions with other changes, and I guess that will end up being included under the umbrella of a deployment zip. I'm kind of being a bit hand wavy there. What about an analysis of what other changes might be required to, for example, wallets or to
that should be in deployment sections.
Yeah, that kind of stuff is stuff that those kinds of considerations are things that the zips themselves and the zip authors need to be taking into account.
Yes.
So And this is partly why I want people to move in the direction of doing the doing the spec, like doing the specs and the implementation sort of somewhat in parallel, so that the deployment issues, can be determined empirically as opposed to guessed and then reevaluated later.
I'm conscious that we don't want to add too much process, because it can be an obstacle to contributors. Yeah, there's a happy medium there.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, just one thing I would say is that the convention, or the practice of writing the spec and doing the code implementation at the same time might be fine for a situation where the people who are writing the spec are doing all the code implementations for all the nodes. But it was certainly a struggle for the Zebra team when
I
that
mean,
was happening.
there is a tradition, and the conventional wisdom is that that's the best approach for things like RFCs, that so you need to implement in order to get feedback. Zcash in general has always been a system where specification has been front loaded, and we've tried to get specifications right in advance. And I think that has worked out very well. But again, there are trade-offs between sort of how much prototyping do you work do you do while you're writing the specification. I don't think you need to have final implementations done when you're writing the spec.
Yeah, no, we don't need final code to be done before as it can transition to proposed.
No, that's why it's in the order it is. Draft to proposed to implemented to active.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, this is sort of the conversation is drifting a little bit far away from like the specific zips we're considering for this.
Yeah, we really need to get onto the actual proposals for NU6, really.
Yeah. But the point I would just to hopefully cap this off say is that the fact that I want, that I and others want implementations to be done earlier shouldn't mean that people who are good at writing specifications but aren't good at implementing things should be dissuaded from writing zips. But someone needs to do an implementation at some point, and it's not something that should just be assumed that, oh, the full node maintainers will do the implementation, because if something is if an idea is popular enough, you'll be able to find people who are interested in implementing it, I guess, put it that way.
Yeah, Zcash is in an interesting position in that NU6 for the time being is probably going to be the only upgrade that requires implementation in both Zcash and Zebra, because
live for the upgrade,
it will just be Zebra. We may have more than one node implementation in future. I don't know.
Yeah,
the process should allow it, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, in other situations, I've seen situations where there must be an implementation for one. There must be a code implementation for one equivalent of a node in Zcash, in order for it to be demonstrated and tested and whatnot, and then once there's agreement that the change to the protocol is going to happen, then and it is finalized, then the implementations are done for the other nodes.
Right. At that point, you've got the general buy-in that to justify doing that. Whereas when you're at the point of just having a zip, then it can be harder to make that determination.
Yeah, there are stricter requirements for on the number of implementations for some RFCs that are on standards track, but I don't think that's necessary here.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think this is a start of providing some sort of clarity and expectation around what people are going to need to do if they expect a proposal to be included in a network upgrade.
And we should mention that just having code implementations doesn't mean that this is going to get into the protocol, because the community consensus is it can always say, no, you have to abandon those implementations. We're not doing this.
Yeah. I guess just a comment there. I guess there's a little bit of a race condition there, where if there's a requirement to do an implementation, then you're potentially asking people to implement throwaway work if there isn't yet clear community consensus around it, which I think may be the case for the sustainability fund. But Andrew's had his hand up for a little while.
Yeah, that can happen.
I'm a little confused at the process for zips. If draft is just an idea and proposal is when it should be ready to implement and it's been more reviewed, zip 320 has been a hot zip lately with text addresses. It's still in draft status, and yet it's been implemented in wallets already and Libris Zcash. Why is this just out of date? Or is this a bad example of how zip flow usually happens?
It should probably be in proposed.
I thought that there was a PR to update its status, but
it may just be that PR hasn't been merged yet.
I think it may just not have merged, and also
it just didn't get sufficient review yet.
Is it common for coding? Because like months ago, a month or two maybe, I considered implementing zip 320, and I went to the forum and said, "What does draft mean?" And it was like, it's not ready for implementation, so I didn't implement it. But I overhear everybody else implementing it.
And so the thing was, there was a point where it was still in draft implementation, because it had I think actually the draft that is there may actually still be the draft version, because it included several different options, for instance, and implementing the whole thing would have indeed been incorrect. Yeah, so if that bit's been merged, then in which case the status should have been updated to
Let me just have a look why that didn't happen.
Okay.
Yeah. We were also, as aforementioned, the at least the ECC parts of the zip editors were in crunch mode basically all of the beginning of this year.
So GitHub doesn't do a great job of this, and I don't know if there's something we can do to improve it on our side, but discoverability of pull requests that impact zips is terrible. There's the Zcash wallet best practices zip. I was looking at it in main only to find out later, oh, no, like it didn't even exist in main, I think. And everybody was looking at a particular pull request, and I had no idea that's what introduced the zip, and I couldn't find it. For the
and this is why,
this is precisely why the comment I made before about what we want to move to is, rather than having these long-running PRs that live in the PR and you have to know to look there to be able to find it, what we want to move to is smaller, more granular updates to the zips, so that if you look at what's in main or look at what's published to the website and you look at that draft, that will be like the most recent version of the draft. And there might be changes to that draft being proposed and considered, but those changes should in general be smaller and more manageable.
That sounds good.
Yeah, and then the process of going from draft to proposed is the point where you are you're ensuring that there has been review of the zip draft as a whole, not just in the incremental updates.
Yeah. For what it's worth, there's not a single open PR that mentions 320 when I search GitHub for PRs.
I know that was a mistake. It should have been in 798, and I just omitted to update it. So that was my mistake.
Great.
That's all.
Yeah. The other aspect here to remember, and this is where a diagram would be more helpful, is that there are sort of two workflows for zips here. One goes through draft, proposed, implemented, final, or active as a sort of like a consensus track, which has a much more integral tie-in into the network upgrade process. And then you have things like zip 315 or wallet level things, which are standards to the point of wallet implementers needing to agree on them, but they are not nearly as they don't need to be as tightly regimented for the process of going through, because they don't require coordination at a global network consensus level. They are just at a wallet consensus level. So we still need to be careful with them and make sure that, the main issue here is just making sure that things aren't stated to be proposed or active or whatever when they're not. And as an example of this, actually, the zip 316, which is the UA's zip, we recently realized that actually we needed to be able to distinguish revisions there, because revision 0 is final, but revision 1 is now only at the proposed stage,
Right.
and is still being implemented. So whereas previously the entire thing was marked as final.
I think calling out the two different levels of rigor that zips will go through, depending on whether they tackle consensus stuff or just guidance and wallet individual app stuff, would be really good to call out. Because even though I've been in the community for a little while and semi-active, I find the idea of writing a zip very intimidating. And if I felt like, or if I was aware that there was a lower level of rigor for some zips than others, I might be more daring enough to try my hand at some of the less rigorous ones as a way to get more involved.
Yeah, that's good feedback. And that's the sort of thing where, adding clarity to zip 0 and in the case of things that hit consensus, zip 1, as well as there's a guide down the bottom for like how to do zips, which starts with "Don't panic" and large friendly letters on the cover.
Zipguide.rst.
Yes.
I have just opened 817 for zips 320 to proposed.
Yeah, great. But if in particular, if the zip guide is still intimidating or has things that you think you want clarity on, please open an issue and we can that can be a documentation bug to fix in the zip guide.
Awesome. Thanks.
I feel like the distinction is similar to the distinction between a hard fork and a soft fork. Like 320 is important because ideally all wallets should hopefully eventually implement it, but it's not as important as, say, if we were to implement text addresses at the protocol layer.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, where were we? I've shared this checklist with Darius, Strad, Chris, and the ZF engineers. So feel free to make suggestions or changes or whatnot.
But by the way, my OCD is preventing me from refraining from pointing out the typo in the title. Thank you.
Oh dear. Okay. I feel like we've done that topic to death.
Yes.
So let's go back. So next up is talking about Zcash deprecation. We talked a little bit about this previously, but maybe we should delve in a little bit on some of the specifics and talk about how we're going to actually make it happen.
So just on time, how much time do we have left? Because we also want to talk about the specific NU6.
Actually, in this call, I don't think we have time to go over this, but I do want to, because this looks like a very nice this is a great expansion of a of a DAG that I threw together at Real World Crypto, and I definitely want to get this into
so
more hands.
which is more important for us to do in this meeting, the Zcash deprecation or NU6?
I think NU6 and NU7 piece.
Yeah,
because we've only got like another 10-15 minutes before we start running over at this point.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
I'm sure Ian would disagree, but that seems to be the consensus.
I'm loath to say we need more meetings, but we might need more meetings.
Don't tell Alfredo. He'll Alfredo hates meetings.
Okay, so the set of things that, like, forget about NU6 and NU7 for a moment. The set of things that have been discussed as ideas for like candidates for inclusion at this point are ZSAs, which is very clearly it's going to be a candidate for inclusion. We just are figuring out the pathway to getting it in as quickly as possible. The sustainability fund, there is there are zips. The zips were, at least when the zip editors last looked at them a couple of months ago, needed some more work, as we saw there. We've now had the update that there is implementation work going on as well. So there's a potential candidate there. The change for explicit fees, which is basically something that we have wanted for ages, but have just never quite had the complexity budget to add it in along with everything else that has been going on. But that's essentially requiring that the transaction explicitly encode the amount of the fee rather than implicitly determining it. For purely shielded transactions, the fee can be directly determined from what's encoded, so that would be duplicative. But for any transaction involving transparent, having the explicit fee means you don't have to do an input lookup, which is greatly simplifies a lot of wallet UX and fixes UX bugs that users have been complaining about for at various points in time. So just because Dodger's putting together the list again, I'll say ZSAs.
Did you mention the advantage for hardware wallets? They can.
We've done things for hardware wallets in the past where, like, you have to calculate the fees when you're creating the transaction, but that's at transaction creation time, and we had already addressed those in previous upgrades with the change to the Zcash algorithm. This is purely an upgrade for when you receive a transaction for, like, history displays and things like that.
I see. Yeah. I think actually it solves the hardware wallet issue more robustly than Zip 143 does, but that's just my opinion.
So that's a candidate. It's like explicit fee field in transaction format is essentially the proposal. The next one after that that has been proposed is changing the way that memos work to essentially create an idea of memo bundles. So the summary here, which I've given in previous Arborist calls, but to give it here again, currently memos there is a memo field of 512 bytes in each output for sapling and for orchard. Each output in each of those has an associated 512 byte memo field. The limitation there is that each transaction only gets that output, which means that each output only has access to at most 512 bytes, 511 for arbitrary data. That places limitations on functionality such as reply addresses. People have done informal things with reply addresses in the past where they've just, like, stuck the text encoding of the address into the field and whatever, but there's no authentication there. You can put whatever you want in there and it doesn't bind it in any way to the transaction. So the concept of authenticated reply addresses is where you include essentially a zero-knowledge proof that the address in the memo field is bound to the same spending key as one of the inputs to the transaction.
Yeah. And to be clear here, it's not that authenticated reply addresses are a consensus feature. It's just that they need to, that proof is quite large.
Yes,
and so-
exactly. If sapling only, there's a protocol already for hacking this into for sapling receivers, but for orchard, the Halo 2 proofs are just too big. You can't fit them in a single one. There's also been a bunch of other ideas proposed over the years for like multi-part memos and stuff. Essentially, what would we do if we had larger memo fields? So the idea of a memo bundle is instead of having one memo per output, each output gains a memo key, which gives them the ability to decrypt 0 or more of the memos in the memo bundle. And the specifics of this are still to be determined, but essentially would be that the memo bundle contains a series of chunks, and within those chunks, some subset of them you can decrypt, which concatenate to form a variable length memo. And the details there are really around like how you continue to hide arity, whether we continue to use like 512-byte chunking or PADME for padding or something like that.
I think
the general premise is that you have a block of data which is independent of sapling or orchard that the memo data goes into, and then what goes specifically into the sapling and orchard parts is a key that lets you decrypt some or all of that data.
Yeah, we know basically how it'll work. There's probably a couple of days specification work, and then sort of making sure that it fits with potential CSA changes. Yeah, it's not very much specification work.
And I think that's everything I'm aware of. There was another list somewhere, I think, at some point, but I can't.
I mean, there's a list in the ECC roadmap design document, and we internally had the
okay, well, yeah, that's
the
everything.
TFL.
Yeah, the only other thing on that list was just if there is a funding stream change for a dev fund or something, that would be the last thing that would go on that list of things being considered.
Yeah, I think that TFL and U6 timeline document is not public, but it doesn't contain anything that isn't in the that we haven't discussed just now.
Yeah.
Oh, and funding stream change. Yes.
Yeah.
So one thing I want to say is, I think we need to discuss memo bundles more, because I think there's a question to be asked as to whether we want to double down on storing memo data on the blockchain, or whether we want to store it off the blockchain, in which case it can be any size. And also that would support eventually moving to a more succinct blockchain architecture.
Yeah. So putting it on the blockchain is convenient. It's not absolutely necessary, but it's convenient for restoring wallets from seed, because then you don't have to go anywhere else in the blockchain to recover that data. And that's I think the primary reason why we do that. There's also the fact that if you store it externally, then you potentially are leaking metadata about accesses to that external storage. So if you were accessing it over a sort of private mixnet-based distributed storage system, and you hand wave and assume that this has very good privacy properties, then yes, that is a reasonable thing to do. But then you have to have this distributed private storage system, and we don't have one.
Yeah, I think that I think that this is the sort of thing that I see as I agree with you, Dodger, that that is a desirable use case, But for things like authenticated reply to, um, I think there are good reasons to have that extra information attached to the transaction itself as opposed to stored elsewhere. But I see this as a process of evolution. By making it possible to put this data on the blockchain, and that would also probably have to include some ZIP 317 changes, since the transaction structure is going to change. The cost to the ecosystem of storing data on the chain is going to change proportionally to how memo bundles are done and so forth. I see this as just a stepping stone, sort of the next evolution of memos. And while I agree that we also want to solve a larger problem, this is a tractable improvement on the current state of the art. And specifically, I want us to have a solution to both authenticated reply to and payment disclosure without having to wait for a mixed net.
Yeah, the other thing is, so currently the ciphertext uses authenticated encryption, and that authentication is over both the note and the memo. And that's kind of inconvenient because when you're if you're sending to a light client, the light client always needs the note, and it may or may not need the memo. You also want to be able to trim memos sort of more easily. So if you have, as would be the case with this memo bundle proposal, if you have an authenticated ciphertext for the note and separate ones for the memos, then it's all sort of much neater and easier to analyze and potentially more efficient.
Yeah. And that also then means from a pruning perspective, if someone wanted to run a build of Zebra, for instance, that Zebra's current architecture doesn't necessarily make this particularly easy with the RocksDB that is immutable. But if someone wanted to run a version that was doing pruning, one option here would be that you could just prune out the memo bundle parts of the transactions and just leave behind the necessary hashes to continue to be able to calculate the TXIDs and so on. If you wanted to run something that allow people to recover their funds but not recover the memo data, potentially. Andrew also makes a point in chat about the variable length memos will leak the length of the memo. There are ways to avoid that or mitigate that. The simplest one is if you consider that right now we already leak the arity of large transactions, like the number of outputs in a transaction is already leaked, and so a transaction that had effectively 1 unit of memo bundle data per output is equivalent to what we currently have, except that then it's paying an extra 32 bytes per output or something for the extra keys, and then an extra 48 because we have the extra tags as well. But what you don't leak, what you're leaking then is an upper bound on the number of memos. You're not actually leaking the number of memos because that memo data might be 1 memo per output, but it could be a single memo that every output or even a subset of outputs is able to access. So there's greater, you're hiding several different possible usage patterns within one pattern of memo data.
I think we'd also plan to use Padme, which is a proposed padding scheme that obscures lengths and has some sort of academic analysis, which is
it's also being just deployed by Apple in their PQ3 protocol for iMessage.
Yeah, so that's a well understood padding scheme.
Cool. Like I said, I think it's a topic we can include in a future Arborist call.
Yeah.
with regards to the dev fund proposals that are currently on the table, only one of them proposes how can I put this, complex or something that is more complex than what exists with the current dev fund. So the current dev fund is fairly simple, split amongst a specified number of, well, sorry, so just on Dara's facial reaction to that. But it is straightforward, and there isn't any complexity. Guy's proposal, if adopted, would see a change in the distribution of funds with every single block, which obviously introduces a little bit of complexity.
So Strada was talking about sort of trying to convince proposers to sort of keep their proposals within what could already be implemented using the existing ZIP 207 mechanism, and I think we figured out a way to do that for Guy's proposal, but
yeah, it's not non-trivial, but it at least the last time I looked at it, it was doable to do it. Although the Guy's proposal is also one of the ones that would then interact more complexly with the ZSF zip for changing the issuance schedule.
Yeah, the interaction there is quite tricky.
Yeah.
I mean, I was thinking earlier that so I don't know what Josh would think about this, but a possibility is 2 years for and just a 1/3 split between ZCG, ZF, and ECC. That's my personal preference.
You should propose that.
I think I will.
Yeah.
Okay, we are technically at time. Do we have any other candidates for NU6? And are there any separate candidates for NU7?
So the obvious candidate for NU7 is, if we do a split that way, is ZSAs. And technically anything we don't put into NU6 could be put into NU7. It's yeah. Again, I would
be worried by complexity budget if we did that, but maybe depending on the details, I could be convinced.
In past network upgrades, we've had documents where we've like looked at different combinations of proposed changes and figured out like what, one of the motivating things there was what combination of features can we do within the given complexity budget for what time is left to do to get things through. So like currently we can see from this ZSAs is complex. Sustainability fund really has 3 parts to it because there are 3 zips, and one of them is comparatively simple, one of them is comparatively complex in its interaction, and one of them is simple but needs it has the consensus question of
Andrew Arnott raised scaling and smart contracts.
So the answer to that is no on both.
Very complicated. No, in the sense that if we did either of those, then we couldn't do CSAs in the same upgrade.
Yeah. To summarize discussions that have happened at multiple previous Arborist calls, but possibly several years ago, the scaling aspect, the primary vehicle for that is going to be some sort of nesting or recursion in proofs. based around that. That was what the NU5 in part was setting the groundwork for, by shifting the route of spend authority for funds for Orchard to a curve that is compatible with recursion. So there's still a bunch of work that would be needed to do to enable that work. And currently the long-term R&D, at least that ECC is working on, is in the direction of proof of stake instead. But we've already essentially done the groundwork towards enabling that. In that direction.
I was going to mention that. So it seems that there's a consensus that ZSAs are the highest priority for sort of to be done for the next 2 upgrades, but there might not be a consensus on whether proof of stake or scalability or some kind of programmability is what we want to focus on after that. Proof of stake is the closest to having a concrete design. So we can kind of see how to design a hybrid consensus with crosslink 2 and the existing proof of work and some BFT algorithm, which BFT algorithm hasn't been established, but we know the properties that it would need to have. For programmability, I think if we wanted to minimize the amount of design work, then probably we might want to look at existing systems like Mina, Alio, and so on, and see whether we can reuse any of the design ideas and perhaps even implementation from those.
There will be a presentation on that topic during ZconV.
Oh, cool. So I'd like us to keep that on the table, and it's very much welcome to discuss it at Zcon or at the Zec Summit. Let's see, what was the other one? Scalability. I mean, you can see from the answers to these questions that this seems to be a lower priority for most people, I think.
Yeah,
it's difficult to interpret because obviously it's
this is 3.5 years. No,
yeah,
sorry, 2.5 years old now. So
yeah, so yeah, I think it's too difficult to interpret these questions, and we should possibly have another poll maybe at Zcon about what people think about the relative, given that we're basically adding user-defined assets, what the priority is between the other three.
Yeah.
Aria, I've had your hand up for a little while.
What about detection keys as a candidate for NU7?
So definitely not a candidate for NU6 because we don't have a concrete proposal for that yet. NU7, it would potentially be a candidate. We would need to coalesce around a design. So there are some we've had a few ideas at various points, and we at least when I say we, I mean the set of people who over the years have been thinking about protocol evolutions to the shielded protocol. Have not found a design that we were at the time happy with for the trade-offs that it was making.
So at that time, we were placing a much higher emphasis on address size. But now that we're using unified addresses, which are generally much larger, I think that needs to be revisited, and there may be ways to do it that have perfectly reasonable address sizes. Whether we could do that at the same time as ZSAs, I don't know.
No. but it is the sort of thing that if we want to deploy something, we should be, we as the community, and specifically people who are interested in getting it out, should be thinking about it in the in the window of the next 4 to 6 months. Because if we wanted to include it on the timeline of an upgrade that went out in April, whatever upgrade that is, we would need for something of that kind, which is changing a critical enough part of the pathway that we would need we would need quite a bit of time for review and audit and things. I would want that to be probably in place by like August, September, I would think, offhand, if we wanted a chance of getting into an upgrade that was going out in April.
I want to raise another potential feature, which is post-quantum privacy. So I was at Real World PQC and Real World Crypto and Hacks in Toronto recently, and there was a lot of focus on upgrading protocols to be post-quantum private, and especially in the context of, so you might be skeptical about sort of whether and how soon quantum computers can break public key encryption. But the forcing factor there is the fact that an adversary can just store the ciphertext, or if it's a blockchain, then they have the ciphertext, and decrypt it later when they have a quantum computer. And in the worst case, that could reveal the whole Zcash transaction graph and all of the memos. It wouldn't allow surrender authority attacks. So there's a potential fix to this, which is to use a post-quantum algorithm for the note encryption. Yes, so what I think you're going to write there is that if addresses are treated as shared secrets, so in other words, the adversary does not know an address, then Zcash is already post-quantum. And I talked about this a bit in my presentation for Zcon 3, I think it was. Was it Zcon 3 or 4? Anyway. But that doesn't help you if you're publicizing addresses because you want anyone to be able to send funds to you.
And also, correction, I believe, for what you've just written, Dodger, is that the end of the sentence?
Yeah. Zcash funds are not at risk from advances in quantum computing, but privacy is.
No, that's backwards.
That's wrong.
Zcash funds are absolutely at risk from advances in quantum computers because so the little bit of modicum of computer science here, you can have perfect hiding or perfect binding, but never both. And the protocols that we currently design for are for perfect or as close to perfect as we can get hiding, which means that the primitives that we have chosen are vulnerable to essentially false proofs if a quantum computer exists. However, that is only a risk from the time that the quantum computer becomes viable. So it's the same
that's
risk.
what I was trying to get at. But,
it's the same risk as with signatures, where for historical data, looking at historical data, it's irrelevant because until a quantum computer exists, correctness is fine amongst classical computers. And from the point the quantum computer exists, past transactions won't be altered because of the nature of the proof of work chain. It's ongoing funds from that time. The risk here is for what's called like harvest now, decrypt later attacks, which is for encryption, not authentication. And that is where the memo data stored on the chain, like the way that Zcash does its privacy is perfectly quantum private, except for the note data stored on chain. And that is private if your recipient address is kept private. That's the distinction that was being made there.
Yes.
So we have a limited issue for post-quantum privacy, which the candidate for this would be make a change that resolves that, and then the process of switching to post-quantum secure from a correctness point of view primitives, that's an ongoing research question from figuring out what kinds of post-quantum systems can give us the efficient ZKPs that we need to be able to switch to them.
Yeah,
So
I mean,
yeah.
So there are candidates already for post-quantum SNARKs, but I think it's not the right time to consider moving Zcash completely to post-quantum SNARKs. But in the sort of NU7, NU8, NU9 timelines, it could be worth switching. It could be worth switching to a post-quantum note encryption algorithm, or actually what you would do is a hybrid algorithm that is secure if either the post-quantum one or the conventional one is. So if you did that, then you would protect against harvest now, decrypt later attacks.
Yeah. And also for context there, Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies are also in the same way at risk from advances in quantum computing, because transparent funds are authorized by Zcash transparent funds, Bitcoin funds, they're all authorized by signatures that the form of which become vulnerable to quantum computers. So
and also other private cryptocurrencies like Monero and sapling-based things.
And any private cryptocurrency that isn't vulnerable in this way using classical cryptography is instead vulnerable to from a privacy perspective. Yeah, there are bigger targets once a quantum computer becomes viable for like these kinds of attacks. Yeah.
Right, we are over time. We're 50 minutes over time. Shall we leave it there and pick up again in, well, we can either pick up again in a couple of weeks, or we can consider scheduling something extra in the meantime. But any strong thoughts? Well, I personally
okay, so the question is, I think based on the timing of when we need to have NU6 fully specified, we probably shouldn't wait 2 weeks.
Yeah, like 2 weeks from now, we're getting into, like, that's the beginning of May, and we really need to be starting to implement some of the things that we want to go into NU6 and like getting things in like now. We already mentioned, I think, in the previous call that, like, for example, the ZSA stuff, the last ZSA call we had earlier this week, but, you know, one of the things out of that was, let's start getting the note encryption pieces in, you know, the first parts of changes that need to happen to be able to make the, you know, the transaction format changes and so on. So we are already needing to start doing these things. And yeah, we need to have a lot more agreement on what we want to go into it if we're going to be working on the right things in the next couple of months.
I think just moving forward the next one to next week, that makes sense.
well, I'm not sure we can just move forward. So it may be a case of adding in another extra one.
I think adding in is going to be a better way to do that.
Yeah, and that would be at a time when the Shielded Labs people can attend, presumably.
Okay, so again, at the same time as our ECCZF engineering sync. And actually, we can talk about Zcash deprecation then as well.
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah, but next time we should front load the sustainability fund piece, because that's the one that I think we have the information, we need the most information on.
Okay.
Yes.
I will probably schedule that tomorrow, given how late it is here.
Oh, there was
Um,
one more point I wanted to make about sort of NU7 and subsequent upgrades, is that we could always find a security issue at any time that required something to be inserted into an upgrade. So we always need to have the flexibility to drop things if needed.
Yeah. Only we could plan our security issues in advance. That'd be great. Cool.
I mean, we did pretty
Let's.
well with sapling.
Yes, I still think that the effort involved there goes unrecognized and somewhat unacknowledged. Okay, let's leave it there. We'll return again in a week's time. I will once again spread the information on the forum, and this time I'll try and make sure that the link actually works, unlike earlier today. Apologies for that. Any other final business before we wrap it up? In that case, I'll say good night and see you all next week.
See ya.
Ciao for now.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.